because your time is precious. So tonight we had Jillian Medoff with us to talk about When We Were Bright and Beautiful. And a quick kind of bio on Jillian is she's the author. This is her 5th novel. And of course, it was named, I believe, the September Book of the Month Club selection. So we'll chat about that in a few minutes. It was also named an Apple Books Best of the Month. It was an Audible editor's pick, and I happened to listen to it as well on Audible. And then it was a People pick, a Town and Country magazine pick, O'Daily, and Publishers Marketplace. So a ton of buzz about this book. It was published August 2nd. And in addition, as I mentioned, Jillian has done 4 other novels: This Could Hurt, I Couldn't Love You More, Good Girls Gone Bad, and Hunger Point. She holds her MFA from NYU, and also serves as a corporate consultant, consulting with companies such as Max Factor and American Home Goods. And now she works with her clients on communication strategies for all aspects of employee experiences. So she is a busy gal. In addition, she writes for the New York Times Book Review, and you're working on your 6th novel, which maybe we will have you tease at the end of this. So welcome, Jillian, to the Peloton Moms Book Club.
Thank you so much for having me. This is an honor.
Yeah,
I'm really happy to be here.
So let's chat. I always like to hear the authors, even though in this discussion we're making the assumption has read the book, but I do always like to kind of hear and start with the author's kind of synopsis of their book. So in your words, share with us what When We Were Bright and Beautiful is all about.
Well, I've been talking about the book since probably last April. We really go into marketing and publicity several months before the book comes out. And it's really now that I'm at the end of the book tour, I really kind of understand what the book is about. So from the very first page, you find out that Cassie Quinn, who's 23, her elder brother calls and says something awful happened to Billy. And it turns out that he's been arrested for sexually assaulting his former girlfriend. And what the book is about on one level is Cassie is telling you the story of her brother's arrest, arraignment, and subsequent trial, and the family's response. And there's another subtext going on, really almost like a second book, where even though Cassie is telling you about her brother's alleged crime, she's actually telling you about a second crime, and that she's the victim of that second crime. And so the book really doesn't come into full fruition until the end. So you read 100 pages or 75 pages and there's a reveal, and then another 75 pages and there's another reveal. And then by the end, you understand what the story that you're actually reading is about. And it's very different from the story that you thought you were starting. And I think it's really a coming of age story, but it is also about the onset of awareness and consciousness, and how when you have a family, how there are experiences and loyalties and responsibilities, some of which are not acknowledged and they're implicit. And it's going from that implicit, non-spoken understanding to explicit acknowledgement of some of the family's experiences. So it's a very interior book. And I was really surprised, to be honest, when we sold the book and as we started going through the marketing with HarperCollins, and they were like, well, we're going to put, a lot of weight behind the book. And I thought, oh, it's so interior. It didn't really strike me as something that would, I understood that people who got the book would really like it. But then, I hope they would. But then when the book came out, it's been so polarizing in terms of readers that really sort of knocked me sideways. So
let's talk a little bit before we dive into that, because there was a mouthful there for us to chat about. But where did the idea for this novel come from? Like, were you kind of pulling from a little bit of current events, or where did this brain cell come from?
So this is my 5th book, and I also have a regular job. And so I try to write. I have to find stories that are going to interest me enough that I'll stay with them for several years. I know you've had lots of authors you've spoken to, and some of them are super successful and write like a book every year. And I write a book every 7 years because, I have this job. So I don't really write for readers. I write for myself. And I've actually written 7 books, and 2 of them I never sold them. And that's because I don't really look at the market. I look at what's interesting me, because if I'm going to start a book, it's going to have to be something that I can stick with and be interested in for between 5 and 7 years.
Yeah.
So originally, my last book, the one before this, was a workplace novel. And it was the structure was very complicated. It was a literary novel, which means it was, it pretty much moved at a glacial pace. And I wanted to do something different. With each book that I write, I try to learn something new about the craft, right? I do it because I have to do it, because I feel compelled to write, and I want to become a better writer. And I am sort of free of the financial aspect of it because I have a job. So I'm not relying on these books to make money. But the original idea was, I thought the first character was the luxury building. That was the character. And the idea was it was going to be like an upstairs, downstairs set in like the Dakota or some luxury building in New York City. Or I thought Downton Abbey set in the 21st century, which I thought would be such a great idea. So it originally was like a bonfire of the vanities, where it kicked off with a crime. So in the very first scene of the old version, and this is as far back as like 2014, a 6-year-old girl is in the back of a town car, and she's being taken to school, and she's alone, and she raises her hand, and the doorman is watching her, and he thinks she's waving goodbye, but she never shows up at school. Turns out she's kidnapped, and he realizes she was signaling for help. And so the whole book started with this little girl, and I worked on it for like a couple of years, where kidnapping, it was the story of how the people in this luxury building would respond to a kidnapping where the girl's mother was put on trial for negligence, but it didn't really have the heat and excitement of to last all those years. So I switched it to sexual assault. Although by 6 months into it, I had stripped down all the other families. I had kept the Quinns. I kept Cassie, except she was not 6 now, she's 23. She has an older brother and a younger brother. Her mother is an heiress. Anton, the doorman, is the same. And once I started really getting into this family, I started seeing, oh, you know what, there's a lot here. But the trick was not to write the book. I had to do something different that would be interesting to me. And what I mean by that is I was still working on this in 2017. So Me Too hit. And I'm like, oh shit, I'm going to have to change the crime again, because I knew that by the time I finished it and sold it and it came out, there would be so many books about sexual assault from every perspective.
Mhm.
And then I started really thinking about, what haven't we seen? Like, how do you elevate the conversation? And that's how I sort of came up with this idea of the repercussions of sexual assault, and what happens to a young girl after, you know, after her worldview is so distorted. What do you do? How do you live with that, with something that is so unnatural? Like, how do you make sense of it? And that's really Cassie's story. So that's a long-winded way of saying it started out completely different.
Yeah, and where it ended up, that's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah.
So talk about a little bit about your writing process then. Like, how do you track all of that? And how do you pivoted and made changes? Is that just edits? Do you do kind of a storyboard?
Well, I usually don't work with an outline, and I tend to I write the way I read. So, I'll write a few pages. Like, I started with this gesture, or once people start talking, the characters start talking, then they start to become real to me. And so I'll write like 20 pages, and then I'll figure something out, and then I'll start over. And then I'll write another, 20 pages more, and then I'll start over. So it's really a lot of going forward and then back, and then forward and back and forward and back. And it's very tedious and it's very slow, but it's also a way to understand all of the characters on a very granular level. Like, I breathe them, like I know them so well. They're not real people, they're not based on real people, but to me, they are living, breathing people. And as I got more into the aspects of the crime, and certainly for the trial, then I started to really have to map out, this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then plot it all on timelines. And it's like a huge puzzle, but it's so satisfying when you figure it out,
When you bring it all together.
and bring it all together. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm hoping the answer is no, but were there any personal experiences that you drew upon, if any?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I think that I never write autobiographical novels, but I always take certain things from my own life. And I think for this, it's like, I don't know if other women at my age, like in my 50s, when Me Too happened, it really made me rethink a lot of the experiences that I'd had as a young adult, as a teenager, like some of the ways that I interacted with men. And when I think now of like things that happened in the office were so inappropriate and so awful, but it's like it never even occurred to me
Right.
that there was something off. And then when you start to look at it through a different lens, you're like, oh, wow, And I also was raised that, so when I was growing up, like the idea of talking to my parents about things that were happening with boys or, men at the office or something, like I would have never talked to them about it.
Right.
And I don't know if you remember that even the movies that came out in the 70s and 80s, they're like Long Duck Dong. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, 16 candles.
I mean, there's, it's like everything is played for a joke. And that was my worldview. I didn't even think twice about it.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden Me Too hits and everything is being reframed. And so that it influenced me in two very significant ways. One was, like looking back, that was really horrifying, some of the stuff that happened. And then I looked back at my own reactions, which was, I was raised by a mother who taught me, you have to be nice. You have to be nice. You always have to think about someone else's perspective. You never, don't think about yourself. It's always about other people. And that becomes kind of like a continuum, right? Because when you have an experience or something happens, my first inclination at any moment is, oh, I don't want to hurt someone's feelings. I don't want to say no. And there's a spectrum, right? I mean, on one hand, maybe someone will say something aggressive and I won't say anything. I'll let it go. Or someone will touch me in an inappropriate way and I won't say anything because I don't want to hurt their feelings. And then you have someone on the other end of the spectrum, like Cassie, whose entire, her entire perspective is framed and perverted. I sort of was really interested in exploring that. Like, it's like you have a narrator who's unreliable, but doesn't realize she's unreliable,
Yeah.
And then
was she always going to be the narrator?
Oh, yeah.
Like through your edits? Yeah.
And I just didn't realize how, like, I knew there was something off about her, even from the earliest days. And then over time, I started to like, all of the pieces started coming together, so.
Yeah. Yes. And we'll try to not, just in case anybody hasn't finished, but
right.
It's hard. It's going to be really hard not to have a spoiler here, but I'll try. So just talking a little bit about Cassie, obviously, she loses her parents, at a very young age, and it basically kind of is adopted by the Quinn family, although not officially. And that's all tied for financial reasons. But she did not have an easy life. I think that's fair to say, right? Even though she has, doesn't want for anything, materialistically, I think losing her parents, and then subsequently what she goes through. Is it fair to say that those traumas kind of really influence the characters that she is when she's 23 and
oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And do you think that she could have recovered from those if she had gotten the kind of treatment that she really needed?
I think so. I mean, I like to think so. I have to think so, right? I mean,
Yeah.
The whole point to me, like, I really am fascinated by closed societies, fraternities, Wall Street, prisons. And to me, the rich, that kind of wealth, she comes from a very wealthy family, it's its own universe. They have, their own, she even says, we have our own currency, and the loyalties that are, fostered in kids, children of the wealth, are sometimes non-negotiable. And it's never said, we need you to support your brother who might be a rapist. We need you to, be good to your other brother who can't hold down a job. Like, the loyalties, it's all, understood, but maybe not explicitly said. And so I really wanted to exploit that, like looking at where wealth can be as much of a cage as it can be, as, there's very little freedom in some ways. And I think the one crippling thing about that kind of wealth is embodied in Nate, the older brother, who he can't get through school, he can't hold down a job. And Cassie says two things. She's like, no matter how much cake you have, someone is always going to feel starved. And Nate didn't need a job because he needed the money. He needed a job because he needed a life. And right. I think I was actively not trying to make the reader sympathetic to the problems of great wealth, but just to see that it can be just as stifling and stunting a life, despite what you see on the internet. That there are, it can be a very parochial, just a place where if you have to go into your father's business, do you go into the family business? There's just a lot of pressure that isn't necessarily talked about when you look, not you, but when one looks at all the websites and the cars, and you see people the way they live in succession, it can be really brutal, And so that was kind of the pressure cooker that I wanted her to grow up in.
Yeah, you lose your ability to choose, right?
Right.
Your free will is gone a little bit, I think.
Right.
I think one of the kind of, for me, more of one of the sadder moments of the, kind of in the early pages of the book was when she talked about that the Quinns couldn't adopt her. I think I mentioned this, tied to money, because ultimately, I think you infer that she's worth more than the Quinns are, right?
Right.
And so, I'm assuming that there would be financial repercussions, I guess, or risk of the Quinns being able to access, her inheritance if they adopted her. But if you really think about that at the core, there's this girl who does not have her parents, and she's got, ridiculous amounts of money, but she can't have real parents because the money inhibits her from having that. So I think that's kind of really like at the crux of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's like having a lot of attention and getting everything you could need, but not a lot of love, or not a lot of the right kind of love.
Yeah. Yeah. But they do, obviously I think do their best to include, to make her part of their family. But there are moments where you kind of expose where Eleanor gives her some tough love. There's that scene at Christmas, I think,
Right.
where she's 9, and obviously, that was tough. I kind of cringed for her and thought, oh, she doesn't know. And, it's tough, right? I mean, it's supposed to be her brothers, but they're not. And I don't know. I felt for her, all throughout the book and her struggles, and then she'd go back to New Haven and Yale, and then get called back, and you know she was part of their world, part of the family, but that wasn't in and out and in and out, and so you can really kind of see, I think, how the whole thing evolved. I think she had the best. She tried, I guess.
She definitely
Tried.
tried. But she had no roadmap, I think.
Yeah.
And I think that one thing that happens with survivors of, sexual assault at a young age is you're not sure, like reality becomes suspect, right? Like everything that happens, it makes no sense. So you have to make sense of it. And I part of her telling her story, to me, the first 100 pages or so, the first 75 pages, is her trying to explain what happened through a more positive lens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because how can you really live in the world with what happened to her? It's horrifying, and there's no way to make sense of it without making it look better than it was. And
right.
It's kind of like when a girl or a young woman or a young man tells their parents, and the mother says, I had no idea, and the girl says, well, I told you. But it's like the way that these stories get told is in fits and starts, and you go forward and you go back, and you're like, no, that didn't happen, but did it happen? And I think what I wanted to portray as close to authentically as I could is just the way we tell ourselves these stories that are to make sense of them to ourselves, which is really what the ending means too, which we don't have to get to now, but we can talk about that too.
Yes. Um, so let's talk a little bit about kind of the secondary characters, the lawyer Peter DiFiore and Detective Haggerty, because they were really great characters in and of themselves. So once you kind of nailed down the Quinn family, were they kind of next who you really focused on? And I mean,
Yeah,
I could almost see subsequent books for them. They were characters in and of themselves.
well, DPRA is my favorite character. And
Yeah.
I think he was like the hardest to write as well, because, Cassie really, really tries so hard to believe that she's smarter than everybody else. And, she uses her sex appeal as sort of, a weapon, but also to bring people in. And she's really positive that she's got this guy's number. And then by the end, you see how he used all of them.
Yeah.
But he said he was going to. And
Right.
that's the thing, is like he said, I'm going to win this case. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to win this case. You just have to be honest with me. And she wasn't honest, but he used her anyway. And I thought that is so profoundly true of what happens.
Yeah.
That she just did not see that coming.
Well, and he gave him a chance, right?
Yeah.
He called the meeting before the trial started, and he said, "Here's your options. We can take the 5 years. He'll be out in 3, and you guys will kind of go unscathed a little bit, or we can go to trial, and then it's no holds barred." And everybody was so, adamant. No, no, no. Let's go. Well, there we go. Let's go. So, you don't have as far as I know, I saw from your bio, you don't have a law background. Talk a little bit about what research, you maybe had to do as far as all of the legal and courtroom scenes, because, you have to be pretty.
I knew that I wanted to do this. Like, I love books like Bonfire of the Vanities, or, I just love a good trial.
Mm.
And I have no experience whatsoever. And so for 18 months, like I set the book 20 years in the future so that they could talk about the trial. Oh, remember when Billy was on trial? And so that I wouldn't have to write it, or I downgraded it from a felony to a misdemeanor. And then of course I had them settle. And none of that it just wasn't interesting. So I said, whatever, I'm just going to do it. And so I started driving to Trenton and sitting through trials that were open to the public. And you can download, you can find trial transcripts. And, it said a couple of times in some reviews that this was based on the Brock Turner trial. And it really wasn't, although I did take some of the bigger, the bigger twists in that trial. But there was no doubt to me in that trial that Brock Turner had done it. You know what I mean? Whereas I wanted to leave the door open. Cassie thinks he did it. Billy did it. And in my heart, I think he did it, but I also didn't want to make it as cut and dried as that case. But in that case too, I don't know if you guys remember, but he was only given like 6 months for a very brutal rape. And
I'll have to Google that now.
Yeah. And then now he's out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was really a travesty, but I also thought, okay, what's the most likely scenario? What's the truest thing? And I think it's a really hard book in that way, because we as a community are used to books about sexual assault having a much more redemptive arc, or they're easier to read in some ways because they're not as I don't think they're as raw. I mean, it's like some books have become a little more packaged, like like a little more sanitized, like you can expect a happy ending or justice. And I believe the ending is hopeful, but I don't know if there's justice,
Right. And you said that you know, some of it's been polarizing both ways. Is that kind of the feedback that you've been getting? Is some people wanted it to be, well, I'm not sure how exactly would have been a perfectly happy ending, but
Yeah.
is that what people, is that the feedback you're getting?
No, I mean, people are really like, I hated this book. I hated Cassie. Um, I hated, they're just saying, I mean, they tag me in their reviews and stuff. So I see a lot of it, and the point is that it did take a provocative opening, which is like, oh, something bad happened to Billy, right? I mean, he's the ostensible rapist, but he also has a family. So
Right.
that would be one one point of view. But I do think that we bring our own biases to the issue. It's a very complex, nuanced issue. And so I just decided when I was working on it that I was going to try to make it as real as possible and authentic. And that's nuanced and that's complicated. And stories don't come out in linear fashion. And sometimes women who have been assaulted might not tell their story for 30 years. I mean, it's a very complicated issue. And I just gave one perspective on it,
Right. Right. But there are certainly many others.
Yes.
So Eleanor, she's kind of the last character I just wanted to chat a little bit about, and then we can segue. But I don't know. She was probably my least favorite character. I'm not exactly sure why. I just found her to be, I guess, so cold and, you know, I don't know. She definitely wanted to try to save her son, but was she really wanting to save her son, or was she wanting to save herself? And at what cost? Because she certainly was not the kindest to the rest of her family during it. So just talk a little bit about Eleanor for us.
I really hated to demonize Eleanor. I mean, I really wanted her to be, three-dimensional but she really grew up in
Yeah.
that world more so than anybody else
Right.
because the boys had a father who was not
No.
part of it.
Right.
And her loyalties and her worldview were really narrow and very parochial. And for her, the legacy, not even the money as much as the legacy and the reputation was more at stake than her daughter's mental health or her adopted daughter's mental health. I mean, I found her to be a very difficult woman, and I understood her, but I just did not like her.
Yeah. I think that's fair to say. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that scene in the car, I think, where they're driving back and she and Lawrence are quibbling in the front seat. Well, first of all, I just thought it was funny that like the grown adult children are riding in the back seat. That kind of got a chuckle at that they all rode in like one one car.
I know.
But that scene was where she was making her offhanded comments about his money woes and all of it. It's just like, well, yeah, I don't. She was tough. I thought she was tough, but I can definitely see like where she, how her worldview was born.
Yeah,
for sure.
I also, the fact that they're all in the back seat, they're infantilized.
Right.
I mean, they're adult children, but they're really not. They're very stunted.
Yeah.
And even the way Nate chases after Lawrence, trying to get his, like he does want his father's attention and approval.
Yeah.
Even though it's like the last person you would want.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although you don't know that until the end.
Yeah. Are there any plans for this to move into film or television that you can talk about?
Yeah, well, what, so I have, so each of my books at one point or another has been optioned. My first book was made into a movie, and, I found that the less I get involved, the better off I am. And in fact, I talked to my agent like a couple of months ago. She's like, well, I assume you'll be wanting to be an executive producer. And I'm like, oh no, no. Because after living with this family, like I am so done. Like I can't be around these people. I don't want to talk. They're like, they're not my friends. I've been in this world too long. Just tell me how it goes. So we actually have a meeting next Tuesday to get all the updates, and I will email you if there's any news. Right now, I haven't heard anything, but I'm not working on it.
Okay.
I have stepped away.
Okay.
So.
Well, I think it screams, either small or big screen, because there's so many characters to dive into. So, and I would love to see kind of like that the courtroom scene played out, because that would be riveting. So Julie wanted to know, with your full-time job, do you set aside specific days, times to write, or is it when idea strikes? Yeah, I would actually ask that question as well, because I do work full-time, and I'm finding it hard to even, do this in my spare time. So I can't even imagine writing a novel.
So when I was growing up, we moved like 17 times. And by the time I was 17, I had gone to like 7 elementary schools, 2 junior highs, and 2 high schools. And
Wow.
so for me, writing was it was a relief, right? So even when I was 5, 6, 7, I was writing stories, but I could never live without financial security. And so, in my family, they were like, and relatives were like, well, what are you going to do? You going to go into journalism? And I'm like, no. And they're like, advertising, all the typical writer jobs. And I'm like, no, I want to write stories. It sounds so stupid. But the truth is that I started working right out of college, and I started writing stories at night and on the weekend. And by the time I went to graduate school, which was like 7 years later, I had a regular career. Like I was in marketing and then communications, and I just wrote at night and on the weekends, and I never knew any other way. So even as I progressed through the ranks and got higher jobs and promotions and all that, I still wrote at night. I wrote like 3 nights a week and all day Saturday. And then by the time I got to Deloitte, that was like really when I started having managerial role. I went down to 4 days a week, and I was a late bloomer. So I didn't meet my husband until I was like 37. I didn't have a kid till I was 39. So all those years were spent, like working and going to work and just perfecting like my systems, like I'm a senior consultant, and I'm not an officer of the company, which means that I don't have people reporting to me. I sort of stay under the radar, and that allows me the freedom to sometimes, like on my lunch hour, I could work a couple of hours, or, you know what I mean? Like I fill it in, but it also takes me a long time.
Right.
Like you met Jennifer Weiner, right? I mean, she was on this summer. I mean, she publishes a book a year. I mean, that's phenomenal to me. I'm in awe of those people. But, like I write a paragraph and it's like, I'm in a sweat. Like I got to, I'm like, okay, I'm done. But I think I'm tired. I mean, it's been kind of a grind for a couple of years, but the idea of not having my books, it's the one place in my life that I have control over, even if bad things happen. And so it becomes sort of like a running commentary. And I keep notes and I have lists, and it just becomes like a friend. Like now the book's over, and it's like I'm really sad. I'm sort of bereft because I'm like, what am I going to think about? Like and I have all this compulsive energy. And my daughter, one of my daughters, I have 3 daughters, but one of has it as well. And I'm like, you can put it to the power of good, or you can really make yourself crazy. And so I channeled it into writing, but I didn't come from like a literary family, or, I didn't know any writers. And it was so ridiculous. My parents thought it was ridiculous to go to grad school for creative writing. But a boyfriend I had at the time was going overseas to open a real estate office. And he said, well, I'm going to Paris on my own. I said, that's fine. I'm going to grad school. And I hadn't even applied. But then I applied, and I just was like, oh, I applied to one school. And I think, God, if I hadn't gotten in, because my graduate thesis I sold as my first novel. But this was all coincidental and circumstantial. It was only when I really started trying, like my second book was a big fat flop. And then for 10 years, I couldn't sell anything. It's like, I was like bumbling around like Forrest Gump, selling a book and getting a movie made. And I'm like, wow, this isn't so hard. All these writers are such, whiny babies. And then when I really said, okay, I'm going to do it, that's when it all fell apart. And it took me like 10 years to do anything. But I don't take it for granted. I know that it's the market's tough, and there's very few books are sold, and I work really hard, but I know that I got pretty lucky, like I exploited luck anytime I could.
Yeah.
Like right now, I should really be the head of a department. But instead, I'm just like a low man on the totem pole.
But it gives you the flexibility to also write.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So you have to choose, right?
You have to choose.
Yeah, you have to choose. So let's talk a little bit about, you are working on your next book because you reference it on your website. So can you give us a little teaser about that?
Yes. Okay, so I've got to get away from anything having to do with social media and cell phones, right? Anything you write in the 21st century, by the time you've written your book, which takes, 5 years, 2 years to sell it, whatever, anything you use is obsolete. So I'm done. I can't do it. I'm going back to 1960. All right, so this is a true story. In the early 60s, a guy in Seattle, the doctor, a nephrologist, came up with the first portable dialysis machine, and it didn't save people's lives, but it would extend their life. And the problem was it was very expensive, and they could only allow, let's say, 12 people a year to use it, because it wasn't portable. It was in one place. You had to, the requirements for using it were very strong. And so they had lay people come together in a committee and decide who was going to get the life-extending dialysis treatment. And this is a real thing. There was an article in Life magazine that came out that talked about the committee, and they never told anybody the names of the people on the committee. There was a doctor, a lawyer, a housewife, a municipal judge, just regular people. And so I'm breathing life into that committee, and I'm going to make them people. And one of the things that I am almost assured of, even though there's no documentation of it, is that everyone on that committee was white. And a lot of the people that they chose to get the treatment were also white. So I'm looking really at race and medical ethics, but I want to tell it through the story of this committee and how they decided to choose the candidates that they did. But I only have 10 pages.
You what?
I only have 10 pages.
You only have 10 pages?
Yeah.
All right. So we have a little, this won't be out in probably
No, I think
2023 or 2024. Is that fair to say?
no, by 2027.
Okay. Awesome. Well, we will look forward to it when it comes, and we will
Well, thank
definitely
you.
watch to see what happens as far as the big screen or the little screen with this. And we kind of always love to end with what have you recently read that you've loved and you think that us Peloton mamas might love to read?
Okay. I have 4 books.
Okay.
I know. I took this very seriously.
I love it.
One is called The Swimmers by Julie Otsuka, Otsuka.
Okay.
It's magnificent. It's about a municipal pool, and each of the characters are you find out who, they're like lane 1A or whatever, but it's about mothers and daughters and Alzheimer's, and it's so beautiful. It's so, and it's very slim. You can read it in like 2 days, but it's magnificent.
Awesome.
The other is Amy Molloy, Aimee Molloy, Molloy, and she wrote a book called Goodnight Beautiful, which is a thriller, but it's very twisty, and it plays on gender in ways that I have not seen done before.
Okay. Awesome.
Yes. One is called Give My Love to the Savages by Chris Stuckey, and it came out, I think, a couple months ago, but it's short stories, and it's brilliant. The writing is so great.
Okay.
And then the other is called The Lost Kings.
Okay.
And I'm trying to find the guy's name because I didn't write it down. Hold on. But I loved it. Hold on.
Well, I love that you've selected books that often haven't been talked about, which I love that. So.
Tyrell Johnson, The Lost Kings.
Okay.
And it's another thriller, but it's got this whole trauma subplot that's just magnificent.
Awesome. Well, we will add those to our list. We will create a graphic and share it with the group. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. And we will get this recording up for all the mamas who couldn't join live. I was getting kind of a lot of messages. Everyone's like, So that's the joy of recording it, right? Life is getting busy for everybody, especially right now. I know for me, my son has 2 college applications due in 2 days. So.
Oh, wow. Good luck.
Yeah.
So do you have, you do once a month? You do 1 book?
No, so we do about 4 books a month. We do some on Instagram and some more. The Instagram ones we do are more kind of teasing the book, encouraging people, to read it. Like we picked some kind of themed October books this month. And then our 2 Zoom chats are you and then Kristen Miller for The Change. So
wow, that was phenomenal.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then we take November and December off because it's just busy for everybody personally, especially for myself and the other Jennifer. So, and then we'll be back in January. So, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm so flattered. I'm not a famous writer, like I'm not. I don't have a big following or whatever. So this was a real honor for me.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and we will definitely continue to talk about the book and recommend it. When people are looking for, I don't even really know how to describe it. It's kind of a familiar, it's law, courtroom. I don't even know, but if you're looking for the unexpected, this is the perfect book, I think. So
thank you so much. This meant so much to me.
Yeah, and congratulations on all your success. Have a great night. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.